Welcome, everybody, to the Redeemed podcast. My name is Charlie Harding, and I am a regular guy. Nothing special about me. I'm not a Joe Rogan or an Andrew Huberman. I am just somebody who has some lived experience, been through some stuff. I am in long term recovery from all substances since April 27th of 2017. I'm a husband and a father of four with two stepchildren. I am a kingdom citizen, believer in Christ. I've been through a lot in my life: success, failure, tragedy, grief, loss, and redemption. This podcast is for anyone who has any kind of life problems. I go over real world solutions and what hasn't worked for me and what has worked for me. My hope is that at least one person can find hope in this. And now for episode 2 of the Redeemed podcast. This one's called Chasing After God. So this is a quote from one of my pastors. It says, "Taking up my cross means giving up my right to live however I want. It means letting Jesus dictate the trajectory of our lives and making him the one thing I pursue above everything else." So a little background for me. As I mentioned in my previous episode, I think I did anyway, that I lost my dad when I was 19 years old. Growing up, I didn't grow up in the church. My parents weren't super religious people. My dad always kind of struggled with that. And that'll kind of come into play later with his death and what I believe about, God. But my mom believed in God. But like I said, we never attended church. The only times I really attended church is when a family member took me, or like I had girlfriends that would go to church. So that was my exposure to it. So when my dad died, I was really mad, and I thought, well, this seals the deal. There's no way that a God could exist. Not, this loving God that they say exists, that, does all this wonderful stuff for us. Because I had heard enough in the culture and from other people to know that, that's what God was, right? But how could a God exist that had stolen my dad from me? And so I was extremely hurt, and I definitely wanted to blame somebody, so I blamed God. In fact, I blamed God so much that I said, I'm not going to believe in you. There's no way that a God could exist. So I went on like that for a while. I don't know, maybe a year or so. It's hard. I can't remember how long. But at some point during that time, I desperately missed my dad so much. I mean, I always do. It's not just at some point, but I thought I would love to see my dad again. And the only way that that's going to happen is if I believe in some stuff, specifically heaven. And if I believe in heaven, I have to believe in hell. If I believe in heaven and hell, then that means I absolutely have to believe in God. So that posed a problem. I didn't have any real faith. Like I said, I'd never grown up in the church anyway. So I didn't have what I refer to as blind faith, right? Just believing because I've been told something over and over again, or believing in something without any real experience. So I kind of left myself on this journey to leave myself open to, experience God, to experience his presence, whatever that meant. I didn't even know, those weren't even terms or words that I knew then. I just okay, I'm going to leave myself open for him coming to me. But I thought that I had such an analytical, scientific mind that I wouldn't believe unless Jesus literally came down from heaven on a beam of light, appeared in front of me, and said, "Yo, dog, I'm real." That, of course, didn't happen. In fact, what I came to find out later Jesus, God, particular, has his own time frame and own way of doing things. So I kind of went on this journey where I was just like us willing to believe. I was willing to believe. Um, and that took a really long time. It probably took anywhere from a decade to, 10, 12 years, something like that. And then I had this experience. I was in my active addiction. I was hanging out with this girl, and she was a believer. She had a strong faith in God, and she knew like kind of where I was in my belief, like what I, where I was kind of on the fence. I wanted to believe, I didn't believe yet, and so she said that she wanted me to check out this band, right? This Christian band. She said, I know where you're at. Like, would you be willing to listen to this band? They're really great. I think you'd like them. And I was like, sure, whatever, right? I can appreciate any kind of music. And so she popped in this DVD of Mercy Me, and it was like, I don't know, some anniversary. I'll have to look it up. But this was, gosh, we're getting on maybe 15, 16 years ago that this happened now, something like that. Anyway, so she pops it in, and I'm listening to the music, and I'm watching it, right? And I appreciate the musicianship. They're very good. There's some catchy songs. I get it. I'm like, okay, I didn't understand like the words and what they were talking about because I had no real experience with God and the Bible and his promises and things like that. So I didn't really understand all of that. But it came to this song called Word of God Speak. And like this is what the chorus says. Word of God speak, would you fall down like rain? Open my eyes to see your majesty. And so as that started, like as this song came on and it really kind of got into it, I began to weep uncontrollably. Just cry like, just like I hadn't cried in 100 years, just weeping uncontrollably. My chest filled with what I can only describe as like so much love that it literally felt like it was going to explode. It was almost to the point of like hurting me, but it was just so full of love that it was painful, right? It's like, and so I had this going on, and then I audibly hear God say, it's okay. Don't worry. No matter what, everything's going to be okay. And then God says, you haven't been, excuse me, you haven't been ready to know until now. And so I'm experiencing this. And as all of this is happening, I call it the slideshow in my brain. All of these slides of all of these times that like probably the most alone I felt in my life, the most desperate I was, the most upset I was, the most sad I was, all of the things, all of the worst times of my life where I thought I was utterly alone. And this is completely cheesy. I understand how it sounds. It is just like the Footprints poem, if you're familiar with that, where, it says, how come when I was alone, I might cry. How come when I was alone, there was only one set of footprints, right? As this person and God were walking together. And he said, during those times, I was carrying you. So even in those moments, right, this slideshow, these images I saw where I was, drunk in the country, throwing whiskey bottles at the sky, screaming at God because I was so angry. In this image, there was a figure there that was with me, either with their arm around me or comforting me or whatever the situation called for. And there were several, like there was just hundreds of all of these times. And I knew in that moment that God had always been there, that was an image of Christ and the Spirit coming to me. And I knew without a doubt that God existed. There was no way that I could explain. It wasn't because, drugs were involved. It wasn't, I know what I experienced and I know what I felt. So there's no way that you can, nobody's going to, if you comment on this and try to tell me whatever, you're not going to change my mind. What I experienced was God, was Christ. And so I walked away from that experience knowing that God existed, finally having that confirmation that God was real. And I went on about my life. It was another 6 years before I got into treatment, right? And I didn't have anybody to disciple me, so I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't go to church because I was still using, because I thought that I was so far still from God and society that I couldn't go there because I wasn't cleaned up enough, right? I wasn't good enough to go to church, so I'm just going to stay away from those people. I used to say, yeah, I know that God exists, but God and I have our own relationship, right? And what that really meant was just that I was going to do whatever I wanted, and I just knew that God existed, so at least I knew I had somebody that I could pray to when I went to jail, or when the chips were down, or whatever it happened to be. So fast forward to going into treatment, and I'm in a counseling session, kind of a group counseling session, and the treatment center that I went to was 12-step based. So they're talking about higher powers, they're talking about praying, they're talking about all these things. And I understand in that moment, pardon me, that I have a higher power. I know what that higher power is. My higher power is God, that exists. But I don't have any kind of relationship. And they gave me a suggestion to maybe start praying, right? Not just when I need something or need help, but not when I'm in trouble or whatever those foxhole prayers that we say, but start praying regularly, right? And so I started going. So I went to my room and shut the door, and I just clasped my hands together and hit the knees, and I was like, I don't know if this is how you do this, but I need some help. And I need your direction, and I want to know you. And so I began going to church every time that they would take us off of campus at the treatment center to go to church. I went to several different churches. When I went to Salina, excuse me, I found a church, the Crossroads Church. Shout out to those guys. Pastor Ron Bowell there. Went to the Crossroads Church, and it was a great experience. They were super accepting of people in addiction, people in recovery, the broken, the people that Jesus was sent here to save and to help and to clean us up, right? To make us, I don't want to say acceptable, but to show us love and to let us know that we are not forsaken, that we can be redeemed. And that's where, the name for my podcast came from. So there was this great guy that I went to. He was a good buddy of mine. His name was Andy. He was at the Serenity House in Salina. That was the reintegration home that I went to, the sober living house. And we would sit on the porch regularly, but specifically Sunday mornings. At this time, I still smoked. We'd sit on the porch and smoke before church, and and we were talking about like not wanting to go to church, and he was like, he goes, yeah, I think about that a lot. And he was Catholic, is Catholic. He's like, I think about that a lot, but then I think, Jesus didn't want to die on the cross, so we got that, and then then he just takes off and walks on to church, and that's something that I carry with me today. It's a funny story to me, but it's also a reminder of what Christ has done for us. That he gave his life. God sent his only Son um, to save us, to make us acceptable, to be the one true sacrifice, so that we have this connection with God. And so in that Crossroads church, they had a great band. The pastor played bass. His son played guitar. They had a really great worship service, and that's really where I first started to feel the connections to God and understand that, because I love music too. I play instruments. Clearly, you can see them in the back. I like to sing, and today that's where I feel God and hear God most, is during worship and through worship. And I recognized that then. And so those were the first times where I felt God's presence, and knowing what my mission is, like knowing that what God had done for me, which was deliver me from my addiction and give me the tools like 12 step and the recovery, the Serenity House, and these things, but knowing that what he gave me was a gift. And the gift wasn't necessarily the deliverance from addiction. The gift was the addiction. The gift was all of that pain and all of the things that I experienced, so that way I could share that with others and show and tell about what God has done in my life. And he gave me that testimony. So while I was in Salina, my original plans for treatment, or not treatment, but after treatment, were to go to Pittsburgh. I live here in Southeast Kansas. Anyway, Pittsburgh, Kansas, go back to school, become an addictions counselor. And this kind of, evolved after I'd gotten into treatment a little bit. But that was my plan, right? I was still not planning on coming back to Chanute, where I have done all my dirt, right? That's where I used, I knew everybody here. I had been in my active addiction for 23 years. I went to high school here. I've lived here my whole life. So coming back here, I thought the best thing for me was, not to come back here. And this was another time where God spoke to me and began to lay the foundation and the path back home. A home opened up, a rental opened up for me, and all of these things just fell into my lap. I didn't even ask for them. It's like this, a place to stay opened up, a job opened up, just a brand new meeting, a Narcotics Anonymous meeting was starting here that were started by my friends. There was just multiple things, and it was clear that God was directing me away from Pittsburgh towards Chanute. And, God told me, this is where you can do the most good. And it was important for the people that were still in their mess that they see that somebody who was from Chanute, who had lived that life, could be redeemed by Christ, could fight their way out of that hole of addiction and change their lives. My example and experience was more beneficial here than anywhere else. So I came back here. The best piece of advice Pastor Ron from Salina gave me was, just start going to church and keep going to different churches until you find the one that you connect with. And that ended up being First Baptist Church here in Chanute. Loved it. The pastor DJ, he actually presided over a very dear friend's funeral. And I remember thinking at that time, because I believed in God at this time, I remember thinking at that time, it's like, if I ever went to church, I'd go to that guy's church because I really liked what he had to say. He and I have since become really close friends and good friends. And, I love his passion and love for Christ and his obedience to what God is calling him to do. And it really shows in the way that he preaches. But so while I was there, starting to go to First Baptist Church, I remember sitting in, services. And this was early on. I think was still within even the first year of going. Again, I heard God speak to me, saying, that I was supposed to be a part of a recovery house, like I had been a part of, like the Serenity House, a sober living environment. And so, of course, my excitement, I wanted to get started on this right away. And I'm looking for these opportunities. And this is my first real time opportunity, I guess, to learn about being obedient and waiting, right? That God's timing is different than mine. And there were several, like, I don't want to say opportunities, but several times where I thought it was going to happen, where DJ and I were working on stuff, where I was just kind of looking, and it never really happened until about 4 or 5 years later. I got the opportunity to work at a place here in Iola, Kansas, called the Recovery House, with a woman I met in recovery. And we had became very dear friends through this experience. And so I finally got to do what I thought was going to be the end, right? That's like, okay, I'm on mission. I'm following God and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I guess this is it for me, right? This is my career from here on out. And I worked there for about 1.5 years. And then God led me in another direction to work as a peer support and a peer mentor. In Kansas, they separate the two. Peer support is mental health, peer mentor is addiction, for a local mental health agency. And now I still get to serve. So, God, that was his direction. Like, he started me out at that recovery house so I could learn how to work with individuals as myself. And I had a lot of growing to do too in that waiting, in that 4 or 5 years that it took to get to that place. God knew that I still needed some training to get to that point. And that all made sense once I finally got there. So I get there, I move to, the next career path, and that's where I'm at now. I still regularly ask God, because I can get really caught up in myself. I think my biggest challenge today is learning how to remove the world and not be distracted by the enemy. And this January, we started a sermon series on sanctification and a consecration. And I decided that I was gonna, I gave up Facebook, and I decided I wasn't gonna, I was gonna fast from refined sugars for 40 days, and I was going to spend a little more time intentionally praying, and meditating. Before I would, spend 10 or 15 minutes praying in the morning, before I headed out to work. And maybe if I was lucky, I would remember to pray throughout the day before certain situations. But most of the time I didn't, right? I'd hit that stuff in the morning, do my Bible devotional, and then kind of forget about it. So I didn't have that conscious contact with my higher power, which is what the 12-step fellowship talks about. But I didn't have that constant contact with God that his word tells us that we need. And so in January, started this fast, decided I was going to do some things, and the Lord started waking me up, super early, like, between 3 and 4 in the morning. Like this morning, it's Sunday morning today. The Lord woke me up at 3. So I've been spending a couple of hours in prayer and meditation praying to God, doing my Bible devotionals. There's just several things that I do, and really focusing myself and my life on God and his promises and who he says I am. And it has been a game changer for me. I have tapered off my antidepressant, which helps me with my anxiety, and that's really why I take it. And I've been off of it for a week and a half now, and I've had so much peace, and so much calmness, and I know that comes from that time that I'm spending in the morning, reminding myself of what God says that I am, who God says that I am, and what my mission is. When I do those things in the morning, it allows me to build strength. And the neuroscience of it is I'm creating these new neural pathways where instead of choosing anxiety and taking ownership of these things, I am choosing to take another direction and be reminded of who God says that I am and what I'm here for. And so it's been huge. Like I said, it's been a game changer for me. I've loved the way that I felt. I even have enough time after I get done with prayer and meditation, because that's my main focus too. I think the intentionality of it. I used to get up and try to get everything done as fast as I could so I could move on to weightlifting or running or whatever that was. So those other things ended up being what my focus was, not the prayer and worship and meditating and focusing on Christ like it should have been. And now that's what my focus is. If I spend so much time in that prayer and meditation and worship in the morning, and then I don't have enough time to run or work out before I have to get ready for work, that's okay. Because the goal is not to get to the workout. The goal is to remind myself of who God says that I am. So before I close this out, these are some things that I write down as part of my something that I read to myself every morning. And so this is a reminder that says, number one, it's to stop letting emotion rewrite what God says about me. And before I go on any further, none of this stuff is like original. Like I plagiarize everybody in my life. Most of this stuff comes from my pastoral team. DJ and Nick, they do an amazing job of writing devotionals on the sermon series, and we get those every day. And so I go through and I read and I take notes, and there's usually some huge takeaway, and I write that down in my prayer journal. So it says, stop letting emotion rewrite what God says about me. I am forgiven. I am an overcomer. I am a conqueror. And through you, as in Christ, I can do all things. You are my Redeemer, and I am not who I used to be. And then another thing that I remind myself of is it's okay to experience resistance or be uncomfortable on mission. When a big part of, I was ready to cash it in as far as what I thought my mission was. I was like, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to do. So I was like, this is too difficult. I can't do it. I was reminded through that prayer and meditation that it's not up to me. My job and what I do, my responsibility is to share my testimony, my experience, strength, and hope, help share resources, help my clients find their way to resources. But outside of that, it's up to God and them. But when I allow the enemy in the world to distract me, and I get away from these things, I get away from reading God's word or being really invested in it daily like I have been, I allow those distractions to put a divide between myself and God. And then I start to take over ownership of it like it's my responsibility, like I'm in control. And I'm not in control. I'm not in control of any of this. So it's okay to experience resistance or be uncomfortable on mission. That's part of it. But when I'm prayed up and I know who God says that I am, and I know that what I'm doing is supposed to, is what I'm doing, I know what I'm doing is what God says I'm supposed to do, then I have peace knowing that He's going to carry me through. And then the more that my mind moves toward Christ, the more I will be in tune with God. And that's so much of what I'm experiencing. I'm spending all this time with God. And the more time that I spend with God in the morning, the more time I spend with God throughout the day. And when I look back on my day and I do my prayer at night, I look back and I go, you know what? I was really in contact with God throughout the whole day. And so my final thought, and this is a repeatable truth from today's one of today's devotionals, was those who refuse the enemy's lies become instruments of God's restoration. So I challenge all you guys to refuse enemy's lies, don't get distracted by the world, and stay in conscious contact with your higher power, with God. He really can do for us more than we can do for ourselves. And in my experience, when I take over, I just ruin things. I say this in 12-step all the time. The only experience I have is 23 years of active addiction, which proves that the only thing that I know how to run is my life into the ground. So I hope that this video finds you well. I hope that it caused you to think, and maybe it caused you to come to Christ, or to at least give it a shot. And I don't know, man. I'll look forward to sending the next video next week. Thanks for listening. This is Charlie Harding and the Redeemed Podcast. And don't forget to like and subscribe.